All right, welcome everybody to Book Think number 8. And with me here today, I have my friend Matt from Matt on Books.
Hello.
Say hello, yeah. And so when I first started paying attention to things bookish on YouTube, I Matt was one of these early channels I started listening to, and I like your presentation, and I like
Thank you.
your review style.
Thanks
so
very
uh,
much.
if anybody here who doesn't know who Matt is right now, go and check out his channel on Matt on Books, and uh, and you can tell us a little bit about your channel, what you do there.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think, pretty typical booktube stuff. I say at the beginning of every video, I talk about fantasy mostly, science fiction sometimes, and comics occasionally. And pretty much that's what I've done. I think since I started, I've also done a couple of sort of somewhat comedic episodes.
Yeah.
But I think maybe the thing that's unique, or at least not that common, that I do is I'm a designer, and I've been working in design for 25 years. So whenever I talk about a book, I always talk about the cover as well, the cover design,
Yeah.
and not just whether I like it or not, but whether the typography is working and what the illustrator maybe did and how they did it and that kind of thing. And I've done a couple of videos on art as well, fantasy, sci-fi related art books and things like that,
Right.
because I collect such books.
Yeah. Cool.
Yep.
Yeah. One of my favorites of yours was the your explanation of the Siege of Pale and Gardens of the Moon. I
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
like that one because I've
I've,
actually shown that to a couple of people who are not normal booktubers or not
yeah.
normal YouTubers. Pay attention to, and I show that to them specifically to people who are reading it for the first time, and that's
Yeah.
a good guide to that section.
I've talked to a lot of people about Malazan, and I've encouraged a lot of people to read it. And that was pretty much the most common thing I heard,
Right.
with people talking about, like, okay, I'm reading the first book and it's just he throws you straight into the middle of crazy stuff going on, and who's fighting who and what exactly is going on. And I mean, if you don't know, we're talking about the second chapter of the first book of
Gardens of the Moon. Yeah. Yeah.
Gardens of the Moon, of the Malazan Book of the Fallen.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's pretty intense,
Yeah.
and he doesn't hold your hand very much. So I thought,
Yeah.
before someone reads that and decides the book's not for them, I could give them a helping hand with a video. And
Yeah. I thought you did a great job on that. I like that one.
thank you.
But today we're here to talk about The Spear Cuts Through Water.
The spear
And
cuts through water.
there you go. So maybe since you like the book design, you can tell us a little bit about this design here.
This is one of my favorite covers. It's so well done. Um, I have it face out on my shelf just because the cover is so amazing, and I want people to see it behind me in my videos and read the damn book because it's really, really good. But the cover is really interesting because I always talk about a sort of a scale between illustrative and atmospheric, where some covers are much more suggestive of the contents of the book, and others are much more just showing you a picture from inside the book. Basically, here's a couple of the characters from the book,
Right.
and here's a scene from the book, and a landscape or a castle or whatever. This is definitely a very atmospheric cover. Yeah, it's not illustrating pretty much anything from the book directly. It's the two little figures that you see in the middle, they're in silhouette, they're very small, but they are the two main characters,
Yeah.
and they're recognizable. But otherwise, it's just sort of a chaos of vines and light and maybe water, and it's creating a mood. Obviously, there's sort of a suggested hand
Yeah. Yeah.
there, the light green behind the two figures. One of the things also it does one of my favorite things, and it does it very well, which is when the illustration is, or the other way around, when the typography of the title and the author's name is integrated into the illustration. So in this cover, there are all sorts of little vines coming out of the illustration and looping around and over and across letters in the typography. So the typography looks like it's sort of being held by these vines. And I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
And it's also just, it's a really, really well done typographic treatment. It's very simple. It's not trying to do anything fancy. The typography is letting the illustration speak, but it's clean. It's very typical layout. It's very centered, but then even the things that are off center, like the and a novel, they're done in such a way that they don't throw off the balance of everything. It still feels harmonious and stable. It's just really, really nicely done.
Yeah, very cool. I agree.
Yeah.
All right, so getting into the book itself, first of all, how I think I know part of this story, but how were you introduced or found out? How did you find out about this book?
BookTube Santa. If anyone doesn't know Evie from the channel She Was Only Evie, Evie is personally responsible for about 25% of the sales of this book. Not literally, but
Yeah.
she has bought a number of copies and gifted them to people. And she was generous enough to gift it to me Christmas 2022. So,
but did you know about it before you got
no,
it, or
no?
So that was just boom.
I had
here.
Never heard of it. Maybe I'd heard her talk about it, but I don't think so. I think she read it and she just loved it so much that she picked 10 or 20 or I don't know how many friends of hers on BookTube and just sent it to them for Christmas.
Wow.
And amazing. I'd never gotten anything from her before. Like I was like, why have I got a package and who's this from? And what is it? It's a book. And it's from Evie. Yeah, I was totally surprised and had completely not expected it. And I thanked her and then she kind of wrote me once a week. So when are you going to read it? When are you going to read it? When are you going to read it? You know? So I didn't waste any time. I think I read it in January last year.
So did you have any reservations about going into it with that kind of pressure? You know, read it.
No, I mean, I was a little nervous because when I'd been on the other side of this position myself, when someone really loves a book, right, and they give it to you, or even if they don't give it to you physically, but they encourage you and tell you how awesome it is and go on and on about it.
Right. So you're worried about liking it.
I was a little nervous. I didn't want to have to say to Evie, you know, that book was all right.
It was okay.
Yeah,
right.
Because she obviously loves that book.
Yeah.
And I was very happy once I got about to the middle of it. I was very happy to be able to say, okay, this is probably going to be on my top list, if not the top book for the year, you know. Yeah. And it ended up I put it as my book of the year for last year.
Yeah, nice.
Yep. It's stunning. It's really, really good. I'm like Evie was that time. Every time someone reads Malazan, like whenever a friend reads Malazan, I'm like, I really hope you like it.
Yep, I understand.
Otherwise, we can't be friends anymore.
Yeah, I know.
Not quite.
Yeah, I got two friends reading Malazan right now, and I'm just like, you're gonna like it. You're gonna like it.
when Josh, who is a good friend, Josh at Red Fury Books, when he read Gardens of the Moon, and he was kind of like, yeah, it's all right. And then he moved on to House Chain or Dead House Gates.
Yeah.
And I think he DNF'd it.
It was Memories of Ice. He DNF'd.
Memories of Ice. He DNF'd. Yeah. He read Dead House Gates and he was like, kind of liked it less. And then he DNF'd Memories of Ice, and I was like, what are we gonna do?
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
All right. So getting into the spirit cuts through water.
Yeah.
So what do you think of were some of the major themes that spoke to you most in this book?
Oh, I think the one of the biggest themes I think that spoke to me personally, and I think it is a probably a very personal thing with me, was like the idea of where you come from
Mm.
and how where you come from is related to who you are or determines in a way who you are. And are we talking
Oh,
spoilers?
yes. Full spoilers. Just warning for everybody out
Okay.
there who has not read the book.
Yep.
We will be getting into full spoilers. Yeah, because we both
Yeah.
read the book. So
Yeah, I mean, one, without already spoiling huge things, but one of the characters is not where he says he's from. And
yeah,
he talks about where he's from very proudly all the time, and is like signaling, I am this, and it is very important that I am this. And it turns out he's not. It turns out that he latched onto an identity that he didn't actually earn, and didn't actually have. And I think it's relatable in a way. Like, you go through life, and maybe you move into different circles and you find a different group of friends, or or maybe it's a job or whatever it is. There's a thing that
yeah.
you want to associate yourself with that you don't have the experience to actually
Even
belong to.
even YouTube. You
Or
know,
YouTube, yeah,
you put on. You have a certain
exactly.
persona.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it can be very tempting to like completely fake something to belong or to get a certain reaction or whatever. And it's often much more difficult to be authentic
Mm.
with all your flaws and your lack of whatever, or I mean. And I found that really, really interesting, because
Yeah.
it's a thing that goes through the whole book with the two main characters, both of them really. The other one isn't pretending to be something he's not, but he's changed compared to what was expected of him where he came from. He doesn't want to be what he used to be anymore.
Right.
And he's finding a new identity, and is going through a lot of the book unsure of who he is and how he should be and react in certain situations, and that kind of thing. And
Yeah, it's
I
fascinating that exploration of his identity throughout the whole book. The prince,
yeah,
and it's also fascinating that the man from Dawari, uh,
Kima.
Kima, yeah, he looks. It looks like he has an obvious flaw with missing one arm,
Yeah.
but that's not his greatest flaw.
Yeah.
Personally, that's just the outside that people see. And I love how you explore what his real flaws are as you go through the book.
I thought it was also really interesting. I mean, like, I don't have any kind of physical disability or anything like that. I don't know what it's like. I've never dealt with
Mhm.
that kind of thing myself. But I thought it was fascinating how early on in the book, when we meet Kima, it's mentioned, it's
Mhm.
it's obvious he's missing an arm. And we never find out what happened to
Right.
him.
Yep.
And B, it's never a problem.
Right.
Like, he is never portrayed as being lesser or incapable or
Yeah.
even having any kind of real disability or problem with only one arm. And in fact, he does some of the more impressive physical things in the book,
Yeah. Yep.
you know.
Some of the fighting and some of
Yeah.
the stuff he has to do to get from one, on a boat or off a boat or what have you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's
So he's not presented as being like incapable.
not at all. Yeah. And I love and I thought it was done subtly. It was like
Yeah.
it wasn't in your face. This guy's wicked capable in spite of only having one arm.
No, it
but
was
it
just
it
normal.
was
He's doing
just
things.
it was just his normal way of going about life, and
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was very well done. Yeah.
I kept like the first time I read it. I've read it twice now. I reread it just last month. Um, the first time I read it, he was introduced. He's only got one arm, and I thought, oh, okay, that's going to be a big deal. Because as someone who has two arms and is used to using both of them, you think having one arm has got to be a real pain in the ass.
Right.
And it wasn't really presented that much. Occasionally, I think there was a mention that he had to do something slightly differently or whatever, but it just wasn't a huge big deal, which I thought was actually quite nice. That it wasn't focused on him having being less capable because of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but it was still part of his character in a subtle
Yeah,
way, but it also allowed us to really focus on the rest of his character,
yeah.
and everything else that was going on.
And like you said, I mean, I think Kima's biggest problem is that he doesn't have anywhere to belong to.
Right.
It's not that
Yes.
he's missing an arm. That's secondary.
Yeah. Right.
um,
Yeah. No, he is definitely searching for a place to belong. Yeah.
he's a lost boy.
Mhm.
In a lot of ways, he's quite a lost boy. Yeah,
Yeah, and that's part of his journey. Even though he's going on this incredible physical journey over the 5 days of the book, his biggest journey is that inner journey, that searching for a place.
yeah.
Very cool. What do you make of the tortoises? The whole idea of the tortoises, I love that idea.
Absolutely,
That really tickled my fancy, I guess.
absolutely. The tortoises are awesome. Um, I mean, they're in a way they're kind of a world building story device,
Mm.
because you have to, for the story to flow the way it flowed, you have to have the ability to, or at least the ability for the empire to communicate over long distances, right?
Right.
Because there are things that are dependent on this happens over there and people over there already know about it, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then also that breaks down and becomes a real problem as the story progresses, that the tortoises don't work anymore in a way.
Yeah.
Um,
As any communication network breaking
yeah.
down would be a problem for any
Yeah. I
like,
mean, imagine
society.
your phone suddenly,
Yeah.
like, you can't call anyone, you can't text anyone, and the internet's gone.
Mhm.
That would be a really big deal for all of us. So, I mean, obviously they have that kind of function, but I also just thought, okay, like the first time the tortoises showed up, the first time I was reading it, I thought, okay, it's going to be a really interesting book, isn't it? Because you've got these giggling telepathic tortoises who sit up in towers and relay messages from the emperor, and to and from the emperor. Yeah, which is just a bizarre.
Yeah, it wasn't that just that they were communicating tortoises, but they would their personalities were so strange.
Yeah,
And a little creepy at times, and
totally.
um but I think it's just um like, I don't know, is that like Jimenez's way of uh showing the like a metaphor for the communication we have today with these phones and stuff like that? How
Maybe.
sometimes it can be creepy and sometimes it's very useful, and it's just,
Yeah,
it made me think
I
about stuff like that.
yeah, I always have a real hard time. I try. Now, I tend to sort of naturally not think about the author, and
Mhm.
and and when I notice that I'm thinking about the author, I try not to. Um, so I never really approach a book by thinking about, like, what was the author trying to do with this, or what was their intent with anything. I'm just, this is the story, and I got the story. I have no access to the author. I don't know them. I can't ask them questions. As far as I'm concerned, they don't exist. The book exists,
The-
but the author, who knows? I have nothing to do with them. Sometimes I do, since I joined BookTube. Obviously, I know Tori, I know Philip, I know some authors now, and I do talk to them about their books. But Jimenez is sort of legendarily hard to get a hold of. Um, Evie managed to get an interview, which was just like,
yeah,
what?
yeah, I
You
know.
did? I
My
mean, after writing him 4 or 5 times, writing his publicist or his manager at
yeah,
the publisher 4 or 5 times. Um, so yeah, I don't really think about the author. I mean, the Tortoise Network did make me think about our communication
that's what it made me
these
think of
days.
was communication networks
Yeah,
and how this stuff works with a society and stuff like that. Yeah, that's
I also couldn't help but think of the game Chinese Whispers. Like, yeah, like you used to play it as a kid. You have a big circle of people. It's probably not PC to call it Chinese Whispers anymore. They probably have a newer name for it. But you have a big circle of people, and one of them gets a message,
oh right,
and
yeah.
they whisper to the next one, who then whispers it on, and then it's interesting to see what it's become
How
when it
much it
gets to the
changed,
end.
right? Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And I kept wondering, like, the tortoises are getting messages from very far away, and they're getting them telepathically. How accurate are they? And
that's
how much are they just actually repeating an accurate message?
yeah,
Um,
that's a good question. It's a
yeah,
good question, but it seemed to work for the society that was
yeah,
in place at the time
yeah.
until these two guys went and disrupted everything. But
Well, I mean, they didn't really disrupt it. I mean, the tortoise network got disrupted because the second terror ate the mother tortoise.
that's right. And of course, we have that whole aspect of the story
Oh my god!
about eating goddesses, eating gods,
I mean,
um,
it's.
which is very mythological. That
I was going to say it's a
you know,
it's
that's
a typical mythological thing,
yeah, and
and
that's another
also
thing.
the beliefs of earlier cultures. Like, it was pretty standard to eat your enemies.
Mm,
Not even in, like, some societies were cannibalistic. I think maybe because they had to be in some way, but some of them it was like, of course you eat the heart of your
the heart,
enemy,
yeah, right, because you gain their power.
because
Yeah,
their bravery, strength, power, all of that, and that part totally made sense to me. But I was kind of surprised because it doesn't really get into things that are kind of icky until towards the middle of the book.
mm.
The beginning is kind of ick free.
Yeah. That's funny because I think the beginning is kind of fairy tale-ish, you know, and then he gets into the some of the gruesome stuff that's going on, and um, so it kind of lures you in like that,
the
especially with
beginning, the beginning to me felt like a typical wuxia movie, with people flying through the air and huge explosions, and you
right,
could
yeah,
I could see the special effects in my head, and it felt kind of wuxia. And then it became kind of a horror story in places. The bit with the second horror eating his mother's finger, it's just like,
I know.
"Whoa, what?"
And he's like reveling in it. He's enjoying.
Yeah. And the second horror, like, standing in the empty carcass of the
Yeah,
tortoise
the tortoise
mother
gods.
goddess,
Yeah,
whatever, and talking about how he ate her and took his time, and she was still alive, and
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. But but very relevant to the whole mythological
totally.
picture, and these terrors are near gods themselves, and
Yeah,
so of course they're going to want that power for themselves. um and I love how we get introduced to the mother, the moon
yeah,
goddess,
yeah.
and how like that, just that the moon goddess is captive, and she finally gets somebody to let her out, take her on this journey with them, and just that whole sequence of because you really don't know what's going to become of her as they're journeying until near the end, where you figure out, yeah, we don't think she's going to be around much longer. But and then of course they had to eat her. but
Yeah.
but
I mean, I was having an argument with someone about this on Discord not too long ago. Um, to me, she wasn't a moon goddess. She was literally the moon.
oh, actually, literally the moon.
Well, I mean, like she's on Earth, and because she's on Earth, there is no moon in the sky. Like until basically the end of the book, there is no moon in the sky. Not only is there no moon in the sky, but it's described that there is a visible hole in the sky where the moon used to be.
That's so that's so it's so funny because it's so unrealistic, but it's fits with the story so
It's
beautifully, you know.
it's mythological. I mean, the whole
Yeah,
thing is it's a
yeah,
very mythological kind of world.
yeah.
And to me, she was literally the moon. I mean, obviously, this old lady that we see in the book is not literally in that moment the moon, but she is the moon incarnated as a person on the earth
As a person,
because she's not in the sky anymore. You know, and then at the end of the book, she goes back to the sky.
right?
You know,
Yeah,
she's not just a goddess who represents the moon. She is the moon as a goddess.
yeah. And maybe I missed that part of it, but was she released because of their actions on defending against the
Yep.
wave, and
Yep.
that's that
Well, I
release?
mean, the whole story that was sort of in the background, the mythological kind of story in the background, is that the moon and the sea are in love.
Yeah,
And the only reason there's a tidal wave, it's not like some sort of physical explanation like we would expect when we think of a tidal wave. It's because the sea's coming to get her. The sea is coming to reclaim his love.
right.
And she goes before the sea comes all the way.
Yeah,
Therefore,
and then boom,
yeah.
and then
Yeah.
yeah, life is back to where it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, they were like part of her being imprisoned, I think, like when the book starts, was um to control her power and to be
Yes,
able
yeah,
to use her power,
yes,
you know.
and
And
that was originally the emperor, the
yeah,
father of the three terrors.
yeah, exactly. um Man, it's
Yeah,
such a good book now that
yeah,
I'm
it's wild stuff. Now that you're remembering the plot is just like, yeah,
yeah.
it's very cool.
Yeah, and the bird that is stolen from the emperor right at the beginning of the book,
Right at the beginning, yeah,
who then travels with them for half of the book and then disappears, and it turns out was actually the third terror
yep,
all
yeah,
along.
and getting his perspective towards the end there, where you find
Yeah.
out where he was the whole time, was beautifully done. What did you make of the point of view and all the switches? Because that's something that you need to probably warn people ahead of time, I think.
Yeah, it took a little getting used to.
Yeah.
Um, I'm someone, I know a lot of people are not like this, and I totally understand, but I am someone who I actively look for books that are different than anything else I've ever read. I like an author who's experimenting with language. I like a structure that I haven't seen before. I like being confused for a bit and having to kind of figure out what's going on. And I enjoy that. A lot of people don't. No judgment. Like that's totally fine. You read the way you read. But I started reading it and I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting because I'm a little confused. And I don't get confused in books that often. But I think considering what's going on, like if you really stop and think about it, it's like a story in a story in a story in a story, and like sometimes there's another level or two inside that, and it's switching from first, second, and third person perspectives all the time, kind of. I gotta say, Jimenez, I'm super impressed, because once you get that basic conceit and you kind of get what's going on,
Mhm.
I never felt lost. I wasn't confused anywhere in the book. Like,
Yeah,
it's just so different that at the beginning I was a little confused, and then I was like, oh, okay, he's doing this. I get it.
yeah, and it must have taken some practice to get that right. You know,
Did you watch Evie's interview with him?
I watched most of it, but I wasn't done with the book yet, so I had to
Right.
stop at certain points.
Okay.
But I did watch most of it. Yeah.
The I found it almost hard to believe. I mean, I believe the author if he says this, but when he originally wrote it, all of that stuff wasn't in there.
I did hear that part. Yeah, right.
Like the nested structure was
Mhm.
not really there, and the shifts between first, second, and third person weren't really there. And I'm like, okay, you just sort of added that stuff later. Wow. Okay. It sounds like there would have been a lot of many editing passes to get it where it got. You know.
Yeah, and nobody writes in a vacuum, so I'm sure he's played with this stuff long before he ever published a novel, while he was, uh, practicing his crafts and stuff like that. So it was just so well done
Yeah.
how he did it. Like when they first started with that second person style
Yeah.
and introduced us to our Lola, our grandmother, basically.
Yeah.
I was instantly hooked with that, because I was just like, oh, okay, here I am. I got a spear. This is awesome.
Yeah.
you know? So,
A lot of people bounce off of second person.
yeah. No,
Um, it's kind of it can be pretty off-putting, because like it just doesn't in a way it just doesn't make sense, because someone is describing my life to me and it's not my life. I'm like, I I know what my life is. I know who my grandmother was, and she wasn't that old lady. Um,
yeah.
and there are books like N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy.
Okay.
The first one, I forget what the first one's called. Um, I,
The
I I had a really hard time getting into it. I did not. I finished that book. I didn't continue with the trilogy, mainly because of the second person, and some of the plot stuff was also, I just didn't really connect to me. But this one, I think because it's also short. It's not the
Yeah.
whole book is in second person.
Right.
Actually,
No,
most of the book is
most
not
of
in
it
second
is
person.
not. Yeah, it's a lot of first,
Yeah,
uh, and some third as well, and
yeah,
it's
and most of it's not in second person, but the second person bits, maybe just because they were kind of short, didn't disturb me. But also the world that you're in second person is close, not the same, but close to our world, closer to our
closer.
world,
Right.
much
Yeah.
closer.
The
It feels like it's something like our world was in the 60s, maybe,
maybe even earlier.
maybe even earlier. Yeah.
30s, 40s, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're listening to the radio and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's close enough, and it feels, and that's the whole thing with that inverted theater type thing, and it feels like you're sometimes watching a show, and sometimes in a show, and then sometimes you're totally in an adventure. You're reading a book, and
speaking of the inverted theater, one of the biggest twisted brain things for me was the point at which the story in the inverted theater interacts directly with you.
yep,
And I mean, if you think about it, like you are sitting in the theater holding this spear, and the spear is in the story, but the spear's been lost in the story. So you in the theater give it to the people in the story so that they can pass it down generations so that you can get it from your Lola and bring it to the theater so that it's just this weird paradoxical loop.
Yep. And the people in the theater with you are shades, so it makes you think, is this like a weird afterlife time type of thing,
Well, and
or
they're also, if I remember this correctly, like the other people in the theater are also from different times.
that's
Like I thought there was a description about their clothing, like some of their clothing looked archaic, and that kind of thing. So they're not just your contemporaries who are physically not there or something. It's never really clearly stated like
yeah,
they're dead.
right. But it's
It's not an
definitely,
afterlife because you're alive.
well, it's definitely a strange place.
It's definitely a strange place, no question. I mean,
Yeah.
it reminded me of oh, now I'm not going to be able to think of the name. Uh, the anime. Oh, it's an anime where. Damn it! I'll think of it. I'll think of it a bit later. I'm just blanking on it right now. Um, but yeah, the inverted theater. It. I mean, it's basically it's a dream world.
Okay. Yeah, that
Basically.
might be a good description for it. Yeah.
Well, and I think wasn't it that you only go to the inverted theater when you're sleeping?
Oh,
Like in the story, you're asleep. You go to sleep, and then you wake up in the inverted theater.
that's a good question. Yeah, that
I
that might
think
be
I
it.
think that's how it went in the book,
Okay.
and it made me think kind of the Sandman comics,
Okay, that's pretty
the
good.
world of
Yeah.
dream.
Right. Yep.
You know, where the world of dream is, first of all, you go there when you're asleep. Second of all, it's all about story. It's all
Yep.
about telling
Awesome.
different stories to people who are sleeping.
Actually, that's pretty. That's a pretty apt comparison. Yeah, I like that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's what it felt like to me. It's just it's a theater where you go when you're asleep, where stories can be told. But the then actual real physical interaction between the dreamer and the story, which allows the dreamer to, in the real world, inherit a spear, that was pretty bizarre to me. That was the bit where I went, wait a sec, did did that just happen? Let me just reread these last couple of pages.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, and it's so vivid and really the way he describes it is so cool. Like I keep expecting to look behind me and see a spear in my wall there, just
yeah,
because of how vivid it was. And it was just
yeah,
really really well done.
yeah. Is the prose and the prose style. It's so well done, so
Yeah.
well done, and doing things. I mean, one of the disconcerting things when I started the book, but at the end of the book was one of my favorite things, was the little italicized first person bits.
Yeah.
So you've got your main story going on,
Yep.
and then you've got these little reflections on what's happening by people who are there
Yep.
or died a minute ago
Yeah.
in the
Even
story,
these
or
even these totally tertiary characters would give
yeah,
you their viewpoint.
exactly. And you get
Yeah.
these little glimpses into other people's minds all over the place. And it was there was such a richness to the story because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good thing they were italicized, because if they weren't, that'd be really
If
confusing.
they weren't, it would have been very confusing. But
Yeah.
I think actually, and as a designer, I really appreciated this.
Yeah.
The italicized bits being these first person bits from other people. The italicized the whole text is broken up into, or broken up by headings,
Yeah. Yeah.
which give the whole text a kind of rhythm which is much more like poetry. It's not
Very,
poetic language all the time, but like this,
very poetic. Yeah.
the
It's
way he uses the
style. Yeah.
rhythm.
Yeah.
of those breaks, and sometimes those headlines were sentences
Yes.
from
Sometimes they were actually dialogue, and sometimes they were actually
yeah,
part of the story. Yeah. Uh,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
sometimes they were just a title. It was
yeah,
broken up. Yeah.
yeah. But so well done, so original. I mean, that was. I will read it again. Evie gave me a hardback, but I bought a paperback just for because I knew I was going to read it again and again, and I'll beat it up. So um,
And
yeah.
so that leads into my last question. Any other reasons besides all we've given here why somebody should read this book? Anything else you can think of?
Um, it's I don't know. It's kind of got everything.
That's a good one. Yeah.
It's a book that has a bit of everything. It is a love story. There is a romance in it,
Yep.
and it is not overbearing. Like I don't read romance
It's
books.
not a romance story. It's a
It's
story,
a story with a
love
romance in it.
story that has romance in it. Yeah.
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 Um, I don't read romance stories uh, like ever. I'm just not that interested in reading about reading a story that is primarily about a romance. Um, but the way this one develops, and it's like, in case anyone doesn't know, it's a homosexual romance. It's two men,
Mhm.
and the way it develops, I thought there was some amazing. Even as an extremely straight man, I was watching these two, and they're boys. They're actually quite young,
Pretty much. Yeah.
and the way they are getting to know each other was extremely boyish. You know,
You're right.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Good observation. Yeah.
I was kind of laughing because I was like, if I was a teenage boy in this culture falling in love with another boy, I would probably want to fight him. You know,
And
like
that's
there are
yeah.
all these scenes where they're like, and
The
then I
rest.
just had to
Yeah.
fight him.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is they're getting to know each other physically. But they're doing it in a very boy way. Like if you've got a young girl and a young boy, they're not going to be doing that because it's a very different kind of interaction. But like two boys doing that just seemed totally like, yeah, that is probably how you do it if you were like an early teen
Yeah. It
couple of
was
boys.
yeah, very well described. Very naturally written.
Yeah.
And yeah, very well.
Um, and it's
Yeah.
extremely. I mean, just as far as reasons to read it, it's extremely intense. There
Yes.
there were a couple of action scenes where I didn't expect to be that blown away.
Mhm.
Like, especially in the middle of the book. I think it's on day 2 or maybe it's day 3 when they're at the lake. Um, it's just like super intense action scenes.
Yes.
It's got a little bit of horror. We already talked about the eating people
Yeah.
stuff, which can be kind of horrific. It's got some very intense emotional stuff going on with the romance, but also like just with what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
Um, it's got so much to say, and it is just so original. It is so different than anything else I've read before. I would
Yeah.
say to anyone, I mean, probably anyone who hasn't read this is probably not watching. But if you haven't read this and you're thinking about giving it a chance, I definitely recommend giving it a couple hundred pages. Like, it's quite different. So it takes a little while. Like I said, it took me a little while to get used to. And at the
Yeah.
beginning, I was like, what exactly is going on? What is this book doing? And it
Yeah.
takes, 100, 150 pages to really get there where you're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I get it.
I would say though that the way the book is laid out allows that to happen because the
Yeah.
way it changes from day one to day two, I think it allows somebody to say, "Oh, you have a totally different tone going into day 2 here, day 3."
Yeah.
It's so you're gonna get that chance to give it a chance, you know. So
Yeah.
I think that's part of it, part of the lure of this book.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the other things I thought was super cool about it is that the whole book is structured into 5 days. The whole story takes 5 days.
Yep.
You know, it's not like a month-long epic or a year or
Right. Yeah.
multiple
Yeah. They're
years
not.
or
Yeah. There's no 3-month travel time being
exactly.
detailed.
They're in a relatively small country,
Mhm.
which that I by the way, I would recommend if you've got a paperback and you like the book, it's worth buying the hardback because the hardback
Has
has
the inside map thing.
this picture, which is in the map picture, which
Yeah.
it's kind of a map, but not really. It's
Not
more of
really
a dreamscape picture. This picture is in color in
in
the
the hard.
hardback, and
Yeah.
it's so much better than seeing it in black and white.
Oh, I can't believe they
Um,
did that.
yeah, seeing it in black and white does not do it justice.
Nope.
It's really a bit of a pity. Um, but I understand. I mean, I totally understand. It's just a lot
Printing
more
costs.
expensive printing 2 pages in color, um, just because there's a map. So yeah, just reproduce in black and white. But yeah, bad thing to do. Get it in hardback. It's definitely worth it.
Awesome. All right, Matt. Well, thank you so much for coming on Book Think, and
Pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
everybody. And I'll put a link to your channel below, so everybody check out Matt's channel.
Yep,
And everybody check out The Spear Cuts Through Water. We all agree it's great.
absolutely.
And until next time, uh, be good to each other. Thank you.
See ya.